Talk to you about a couple of stocks that I've read about in terms of these stocks sort of reaching the what they call the oversold capacity. Oversold is when the price starts to depress because of bad economic news, and it actually goes further than what it should go, meaning that people have really actually overreacted to something. Market reversals and overreactions and things like that are a very big deal in the stock market. They happen all the time, and there are plenty of stocks out here that are really cheap. Not because any decline means you've got cheap stocks, but this is a decline that's built on a lot of fear and a lot of panic. And that fear and panic has really opened up a lot of opportunities for buying in the stock market, according to a lot of experts. One of the stocks is Hilton, and the other one is MGM Resorts. According to the research I've been doing, these two stocks have actually really dropped a lot, and they haven't just dropped a lot like everything else. They've actually dropped to the point where the amount that they're being sold for is actually less than what they're truly valued on a fundamental level. So one of the experts here, his name is Matt Maley. I don't have his first name in front of me. He says, I think if you want to look to be bottom fishing, you might want to look in some other areas because you can still do very well in those. But he says, so Mark Tepper, though, from the CEO of Strategic Wealth Partners, says that investors should avoid the hotel space altogether, though. So there's a differing sort of set of opinions on this. That hotel stocks are not really, the best way to go because there's so much uncertainty with the coronavirus. However, there are many people who feel that there are some quality companies like Hilton and MGM that are actually being sold at a price that is much lower than what they should be sold. So Tepper says this isn't a cash flow issue. He says this is a real demand destruction. That money's gone. They're not going to recapture it 6 months from today. So he's one guy that believes that these stocks will never recover and never do very well. And I do believe there's some long-term damage. But then there are others who look at a company like Hilton and they look at MGM and they say, okay, these are strong companies that are just having a bad time. Right now, Hilton fell 5% on Thursday, and MGM plunged about 16%. And so ultimately, Maley, this other guy, he actually feels that Hilton is oversold. So he says Hilton's weekly RSI chart, I have to look and see what RSI stands for, is actually more oversold, more extreme than it was at the last two bottoms in 2018 and 2016. And so, the hard part about this corona thing is that it's hard to compare the coronavirus decline to other bear markets in the past, because other bear markets occurred for different reasons, and there's still a lot to sort of be figured out about this in terms of what it means and whether or not we should how much panicking we should actually do. I think that one of the things that's really interesting to me is that so far I haven't seen anything actually happen in the U.S. that makes the coronavirus as scary as people make it out to be. I'm not saying that it's not scary. I'm not saying that it's not bad. I'm saying that not many people have died from this. I think the number is still maybe 60 something or maybe 70 something, and 25 of those people actually died in one senior center or one seniors home or one home for disabled and people and senior citizens. So at this point, the driving force, the driving factor behind all of this has been actually fear and panic and kind of shutting down as a preventative measure. But the question becomes, so what happens when we decide that we're going to open everything up? I mean, eventually we're going to open everything up. At some point, we're going to get back to business as usual. And what does that economy look like? It won't be the same economy that you're in right now. There's some damage that's done that just won't be reversed. Some things that happen that just, won't go back to normal. It's like if you put your spouse out of the house for 6 weeks, they may not be the same person when you bring them back in that they were when you broke up with them the first time. But I do think that there's reason to think that perhaps this will be controlled. I was watching this show on Netflix last night called Pandemic, and on Pandemic they were actually talking about, I think it was the swine flu. It was, or maybe it's H5N7 or H7N5 or something like that. It was some other type of flu, and they said the mortality rate was actually 60% for this kind of flu. And they said, fortunately, it hasn't gotten outside of China. but or maybe it was the bird flu. One of the two. It was either bird or swine, or one of the birds or one of the. I gotta go look it up. But literally, they said that the mortality rate was 60%, and I compared that to coronavirus, which has a mortality rate of what looks like maybe 1%. I think. I mean, the U.S. Maybe 2%, maybe 2.5%, right? So this isn't the end of the world. We've actually dealt with things that have a higher mortality rate. I mean, HIV's mortality rate is much higher than that. I think the difference is obviously the fact that it's easier to pass around, and the fortunate thing about this other flu that had the 60% mortality rate is that it was hard to catch. It was hard to pass around. So what's interesting to me is, I think, okay, so what happens when that other flu, that it has the 60% mortality rate, let's say it morphs itself into something that is easy to catch, easy to pass, then that kind of says we're all in trouble, right? That says we're in big. So I think it doesn't mean 3% is not bad. Doesn't mean 3% isn't something to worry about. But it could be much worse than this. Literally, it could be 20 times higher, compared to other flus. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. And there are places that seem to have gotten it under control. And I think that we are doing. I know at the very least we know we're doing everything we can to control it. And in fact, I even go into my podcast and I ask everybody. I say, okay, we're all reacting to this virus. How many of you have a relative who has died from coronavirus? How many of you have a relative not caught it, let alone caught it? Most of you don't have anybody that's just caught it in your family, but how many of you have a relative that's actually died from it? And so I don't know. So Kevin says you're acting as this virus has been around for years. I think it has been, actually. I think that with these viruses, just because a virus doesn't disappear just because it's not in the media. It doesn't not exist just because the reporters aren't talking about it. What happened to Ebola? Like, do you really think Ebola is extinct? Like, do you think? I mean, viruses have been around long before human beings. Viruses will be around long after you're gone. Chances are, when you're gone, when you don't exist anymore, viruses are what's going to take you out. I don't know if you guys know this or not, but the scientists say, and Bill Gates said it. Now, there's a conspiracy theory to say he created all this, and I need evidence, right? But anything's possible, right? Anything's possible. But here's the thing: viruses. This virus has been around. I think a lot of these viruses have been around, and so people, what happens is if people talk about it in the media, then suddenly it becomes kind of a big thing, and